Good day, and welcome to the Meaningfully Engaging Stakeholders to Improve Outcomes webinar. As a reminder, today's call is being recorded. At this time, I would like to turn the conference over to Chris King. Please go ahead.
Thank you. I'll just do some quick introductions. Today, you'll hear from Greg Moore and Elliot Hinkle, who will be our facilitators. You will also hear from David Hall from the Center for States, and teams representing 2 states, Keith Zirkle, Karen DeRasmo, and Rachel Neff from Delaware, and Nancy Gagliano and Aubrey Powers from New Jersey. I will now turn it over to Greg Moore to get started. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Chris, and good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the event. Quickly, I'd like to walk through our agenda. Next we will review the objectives. Then we will talk about stakeholder engagement and strategic planning, really the who, when, and why. We'll talk about creating an agency culture that encourages participation, as well as common barriers to meaningfully engaging youth, families, and stakeholders in planning and improvement processes. Additionally, we will discuss tasks and steps for how to engage stakeholders in strategic planning, and we will conclude with a question and answer session between you all as participants and myself and our presenters. Our objectives for today are to identify key stakeholder groups who should be involved in strategic planning, as well as to identify strategies to meaningfully engage stakeholders in strategic planning and other change efforts. Additionally, identify examples of successful stakeholder engagement from other states and the impacts of those efforts, and to identify barriers and challenges to meaningful stakeholder engagement and strategies for building an agency culture that values stakeholder participation. All right, so with that, let's get started. In our efforts to support and help to improve outcomes for children, youth, and families, it's critical that child welfare systems establish a clear vision for the future, including one that prioritizes prevention, as is a current Children's Bureau priority, with shared responsibilities across youth, families, and stakeholder groups, such as agency staff and personnel, the legal and judicial communities, provider groups, and so on. This can be more easily facilitated and better supported by integrating all strategic planning and improvement processes with continuous quality improvement principles and frameworks. Let me expound a bit. Within child welfare, we are involved in a number of planning, monitoring, and reporting processes. This is at our local and state level, and then of course at the federal level as well. Each of these processes has their own distinct time frames, purposes, teams who are involved with them, and so forth. Some examples of these include the Child and Family Services Plans, Annual Progress and Services Reports, the Child and Family Services Reviews, the Program Improvement Plans, Agency CQI processes, Court Improvement Program Assessments and Plans, and so forth. Integrating federally mandated strategic planning and program improvement processes like the CFSP and the CFSR PIP with CQI efforts can help states to align their priorities, to make connections between these processes, to share information among teams, and to realize efficiencies. By engaging youth, families, and stakeholders in these activities, agencies can access the information they need for planning and decision-making and ensure that agency services meet community needs. The graphic that you see here, this exhibit, it highlights the cyclical nature of these strategic planning and improvement processes and how they map to each other. You'll see at the outer band, which is an orangish color, how youth, family, and stakeholder participation impacts each of these. Throughout our conversation today, we hope to offer some ideas about the importance of youth, family, and stakeholder input and how to meaningfully engage them in these processes through an integrated approach to strategic planning and program improvement, all with the goal to improve outcomes for children, youth, and families. We'll now zoom in briefly to the top and then to the bottom of this graphic to highlight a few more specifics. Here you see that youth, family, and stakeholder engagement, again, that outer band is involved in all of these, should be. Then the next inner band, which is green, it delineates how state and local initiatives, which are ongoing and that run concurrently to these other processes, which are federally mandated. They're in the blue boxes and the blue circle on the interior. Those include the various federally mandated planning, monitoring, and reporting processes, as well as the timeframes. And specifically, you'll see that there are the acronyms and then the timeframes in parentheses underneath them. For recognizing that everyone may not have experience with all of these processes, the acronyms are also spelled out there on the slide. But here in this, with regards to planning, we have the CFSP, which occurs every 5 years. It's a long-term 5-year strategic plan for child welfare agencies. Then you see right below that the CFSR, which is the Child and Family Services Reviews. This is a federal monitoring process that the Children's Bureau uses to monitor state child welfare agencies and assess safety, permanency, and well-being using data indicators, systemic factors, and child and family outcomes. Over on the opposite side, you'll see a couple of reporting processes. There is the APSR, which is an annual reporting that provides updates on efforts to achieve the goals within the CFSP, as well as PIP reporting, which that is reporting that child welfare agencies do at regular intervals, be it quarterly or semi-annually, to update the Children's Bureau on their PIP progress. Dropping down to the bottom of the graphic, you'll see there the program improvement plans on the left-hand side. The CFSR PIP is a strategic plan that addresses the challenges identified through the aforementioned statewide assessment and case reviews as part of the Child and Family Services Reviews. There is a 2-year implementation period during which the aforementioned reporting occurs. The other blue box down here outlines some other monitoring and improvement processes from both the federal and state levels, including agency CQI processes, the National Youth and Transition Database Reviews, 4E foster care eligibility reviews, AFCARS assessment reviews, CCWIS reviews, and then also the Court Improvement Program assessments and plans. I want to state up front that from the title of this webinar to some of what has been covered so far with the objectives in the agenda, we're talking about stakeholder engagement and stakeholder participation. I wanted to make clear at the outset that children, youth, and families are more than stakeholders in our systems. They must have an equal voice at the table in informing system improvement processes. Because they are the primary consumers of child welfare services, they have unique experiences within the system and their perspectives, which must be used to inform all aspects of our work at both the case and system levels, from decision-making and goal-setting in their individual cases to informing planning and improvement processes for the child welfare system as a whole. Frankly, if we're not engaging youth, families in these processes, then we're not doing it correctly. Engaging youth, families, and stakeholders in ongoing strategic planning, monitoring, and reporting efforts is crucial to child welfare agency success in achieving their goals and improving outcomes for children, youth, and families. Such engagement is so vital to systems improvement efforts that federal regulations require states to consistently engage stakeholders, such as agencies, organizations, and individuals in ongoing CFSP-related consultation and coordination processes. Additionally, the CFSR specifically assesses stakeholder engagement and collaboration with families. Throughout each year, states also work to improve child and family outcomes and agency functioning via state-initiated CQI efforts and other change initiatives And stakeholder participation as well as youth and family involvement is vital to these processes as well. Meaningful youth, family, and stakeholder engagement is mutually beneficial, helping both the agency and its stakeholders. What you see here, that's what's outlined on the slide. We've outlined some benefits to the agency as well as some benefits to youth, families, and stakeholders. With regard to some of the benefits to the child welfare agency, you can end up with higher quality, more inclusive decision making. Additionally, you have enhanced access to useful information and data. Their engagement and involvement can result in services that meet community needs, as well as enhanced community confidence in agency initiatives. At this point, I would like to turn it over to Elliot Hinkle, my co-facilitator, to talk to us about the benefits to youth, families, and stakeholders.
Thanks, Greg. When we're thinking about the benefits to youth, families, and stakeholders, we can think about how this benefits mutually the agency and stakeholders. And as Greg mentioned, putting a lot of emphasis on youth and families in particular because they are more than stakeholders and they are the people that are most impacted by the work of the system. By engaging youth, families, and other stakeholders, there's greater opportunities to contribute directly to policy and program development, more open and transparent lines of communication, increasing the accountability of government agencies. There's an increase in innovation that has the potential to improve outcomes for youth and families, especially when they're able to inform the services that they really think would be most helpful to them. There's greater access to decision-making processes, resulting in the delivery of more efficient and responsive services. And there's early identification of overlap between stakeholders and agency work, encouraging integrated and comprehensive solutions to complex policy issues. Who are the stakeholders? As recipients and consumers of the system's services supports, children, youth, and families are more than stakeholders and should always be engaged. Children can be engaged, children and youth can be engaged in their cases in the CQI process, CFSR qualitative case reviews, youth representatives, including those who are currently in care or were formerly in care, and family members. This could be birth families of origin or kinship caregivers. For some youth, family members could also include foster parents and foster family. A stakeholder is an individual or group who has an active, vested interest in the outcome of an organization's actions. Stakeholders can be internal or external to a child welfare system. Some examples of stakeholders include the Child Welfare Agency, internal partners such as state and local agency staff, training staff, contract staff, supervisors and administrators, tribal representatives, legal and judicial representatives such as attorneys ad litem, guardians ad litem, parent counsel, state or agency attorneys, resource families, representatives from state and local government and professional advocacy organizations, external community partners such as mental health, substance use disorder, juvenile justice, developmental disabilities, domestic violence, representatives from racial, ethnic, and culturally community groups, formal and informal community leaders and representatives as well, such as religious leaders, community organizational members. I'll hand it back over to Greg now.
Thanks, Elliot. All right. We come to the first in our series of polling questions for the event. So let's take a few minutes to hear about your experiences, your being the audience here, with engaging stakeholders in strategic planning and other improvement processes. If you would there, on the left-hand side, you'll see check the planning, monitoring, and reporting processes with which you have experience. You can check as many as that apply. So as folks are checking that, or checking their responses, it looks like there a number of folks have involvement with the CFSP and the APSR, as well as the CFSR and the PIP. That makes sense as we are really coming right out of the round 3 Child and Family Services reviews, and states are either working on their PIPs or developing their PIPs, and so that's not surprising to see that high level of involvement. Agency CQI processes, that's great. The second question that we have there, in your experience, how challenging is it to meaningfully engage stakeholders in these processes? You'll see the Likert scale responses there. Folks are chiming in. It seems that there is a lot of consensus that it is somewhat challenging to engage stakeholders in these processes. At the bottom, that's a short answer question, not prescriptive. You can type a response there in the field. One note is that if you type a response and then type a second response, it will overwrite your first response. So the question there is, which stakeholders have been most challenging to engage in these processes? Folks are still typing their responses, but it looks like that we have folks are chiming in to say that there is some difficulty in engaging the legal and judicial communities, so judges, attorneys, parents and youth, service providers, foster parents, parents and youth. There's a lot of responses here regarding parents and family members, it looks like, judicial members again, foster parents, courts. So there seems to be consensus here that with amongst folks that between engaging youth and families, the legal and judicial communities, as well as some other stakeholders such as service providers. And then just following up here, I think that, again, with the first couple of questions, overwhelmingly we have folks, almost 80% of respondents have involvement with the CFSR and the PIP. And then about 2/3 of us have found that it's somewhat challenging to meaningfully engage stakeholders in these processes. All right, with that, we'll go ahead and move forward. So when should stakeholders be engaged? First, I want to reiterate that youth and families should always be engaged. I think that instead of this question here at the top, a more appropriate question would be, when should children, youth, and families not be engaged? To which I would respond, never. They should always be engaged in these processes. Then what you see there within the illustration on the slide is trying to draw out that engagement really occurs on two levels. Agencies need to engage youth, families, and stakeholders year-round in their ongoing processes, such as their continuous quality improvement efforts and planning, while also asking them to participate in specific processes with defined start and end dates, like the CFSP, the CFSR, and other agency change initiatives. Regular quality stakeholder engagement builds familiarity with agency work and relationships with agency staff, which can be used to facilitate work on specific time-limited processes. This familiarity and systematic, meaningful engagement simplifies these improvement processes and establishes regular communication, coordination, and data sharing.
So to effectively engage youth, to effectively engage youth, families, and stakeholders in agency work, agency leadership and staff must work at building a culture at the agency that supports meaningful stakeholder participation. This is something that takes a lot of active and intentional work to shift a culture around this, especially when thinking about youth and families. This graphic delineates the qualities of an agency culture that supports stakeholder engagement. So there should be responsiveness and it should be reciprocal. Meaningful engagement is a two-way process between the stakeholder and the agency. The agency values stakeholder contributions to improving outcomes for children, youth, and family. The agency commits to seek out and facilitates the involvement of all who are potentially interested or affected by its work, including those that are harder to reach for reasons such as language, culture, age, mobility, and even geographic location when we're thinking of inclusivity. the agency should be impartial and objective. As part of meaningful engagement, the agency makes efforts to ensure information is accessible and objective and facilitates engagement with all stakeholders. It should be open, transparent, and trusting. The agency provides information so stakeholders can participate in an informed way and fosters a culture of sharing ideas. Lastly, it should be respectful. The agency values stakeholders and uses their input to improve policy and outcomes. Child welfare leaders actively listen to and understand stakeholder needs. For myself, as a young person with lived experience that now works in the professional world, I often was invited to the table, and something that was hard to feel both included and respectful was that if I didn't feel as though I was meaningfully invited to the table such that what I had to say was really going to be put to use or that I would actually be heard, then it would only add to me not wanting to come to the next invitation that I was invited to or the next table I was invited to. Also, when we don't truly invite people to the table with transparency, it creates a harder ability to bring them to the table the next time. So anytime we can be transparent and truly include folks, that can be meaningful. This includes thinking of meaningful not just about how many people are at the table, but how they're actually engaged. Even if you have a dominant group that has more lived experience than professionals, that doesn't necessarily mean you're truly doing the work of engaging folks. For authentic youth engagement, I want to start by introducing David Hall, who's a young adult consultant like myself at the Center for States, and he'll have a little bit of time to discuss some genuine youth engagement in agency strategic planning and other improvement processes. And David and I have been able to participate in some similar work, such as the National Youth and Transitions Database work that has been a really key way that I know I have learned and other young adults have learned to be involved in a meaningful and genuine way in change efforts at the federal level to come into states and help model that so states will also do the same. So David, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, thank you so much for having me. So to begin, just as Dave stated, my very firm belief is that, having youth engagement or really any stakeholders engagement is not just about having input. At the end of the day, the engagement really comes into play of how much you can engage someone. And that's really based on the responsibilities that you allow them to have, the trust that you give them, and autonomy that you give them to be able to work on the different initiatives all the way to the top, right? And with that, my journey with youth engagement started as most young people who were in care. Myself, I have lived experience and was actually in care twice. Whenever I first started, I actually started right after I aged out. I had limited advocacy opportunities. They were things, that are pretty typical, I think, of most agencies. We have our youth panels for worker trainings, or, maybe whenever CFSR comes around, or, NIDED, different things like that. That's, pretty typical. But at the end of the day, for me, I was really focused on, I want to make legitimate change. I want to see something that's measurable and systemic and comprehensive and all these different things that I know actually and truly improves the quality of life for young people in care and their families. And, I really want to be involved in doing the work. Unfortunately, I was not provided those opportunities, and so I've always been, kind of one of those people who I want to go and find the answers to the questions that I have, as well as, do what I can to make as much of a difference as I can. And as a result of that, I started getting involved with different groups, and my journey brought me through, as many of us know, Casey Family Programs and Foster Club. And through different opportunities that I've had with them, that led me to sort of honing my different content knowledge and skills, and even networking. And as a result of those different groups that still are happening to this day, now at a much higher level of involvement, I was able to then join on to the Center for States a couple years ago. And with them, again, was able to develop that more and be able to have more opportunities as they as time goes on, and in doing all these different things, and again doing the work, I've been able to develop kind of a thing that I've been calling lived expertise, right? So lived experience is, I think, really great for things like input, but if we can, just as with myself, if we can take young people who have that lived experience and be able to show them this is how the system works so that they can be involved in our high-level discussions. Because mind you, I'm only 23, right? And I'm doing music education, right? So it has absolutely nothing to do with that. So people can learn if we put in the time and we're willing to trust them that they'll put in the work. And so, being able to do that, I've been able to develop all that content knowledge and those skills and be able to have these different opportunities that have allowed me to develop that lived expertise. And in doing so, I've also been able to, as Elliot said, to be a part of National Youth in Transition database, right? And so with that, I'm able to actually use the lens of being in foster care to, say with those sample case studies, being able to do things like that, I think is truly helpful to the work that's being done. And I think one of the great things that comes with that is, all of us know that while we might not necessarily have done it, we can have a young person be involved, especially since, many times those who age out tend to go into the child welfare field. We can have a person be involved in, setting us up for success on the state team. And being able to have that person sort of, run the show behind the scenes as far as being able to collect all those cases and all those different things, I think would allow them to, again, develop that lived expertise while also showing that they can do it. Because I think that's one of the things that, we want things to be done perfect, especially whenever it comes to the feds, right? But the thing is that it can be perfect and also improve the work that we're doing in the long term. And so if we can be able to work with these young people to make that happen, then I think we'll be able to set ourselves up for success, because if someone can handle all of that and we know all the work that goes into there, the burden now gets taken off of us, because that person is more than happy to make that kind of a difference and put in that kind of work. And as a result of that, now they're smarter and they've worked harder and they can make a meaningful contribution to things later on that aren't just nighted. From there, I have, again, with Casey, I've now actually been invited to be a part of their steering committee for a group that's essentially working on their prevention efforts and quality of life improvements nationally. And the thing is that I'm not there to be a constituent consultant or anything like that. I'm there solely as someone who just so happens to have lived experience, and that's something that comes from that. Yeah, and then with that, and really the last thing I really want to get into is back in December. There's a group that's called the State Advisory Group for Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. Don't worry, you don't have to memorize that. I just call it the Juvenile Justice Board. With that group, I was appointed by Governor Fallin. I'm in Oklahoma. But yeah, I was appointed by Governor Fallin back in December of 2018. And I was very excited because of the work that group is doing. And myself, I was actually a crossover youth. One of the things that happened whenever I was there is first of all, I was involved fully with the board, right? So it wasn't just I was there for input or I'm there for the youth voice. I got a vote just as everyone else did. I got speaking time just as everyone else did. I was trained with everyone else and was able to participate in strategic planning in all these different things. With that, the person who was actually from, we call it the Office of Juvenile Affairs, but the person who was really our, departmental contact, if you will. I think a lot of us, maybe we contracted out or something like that, and we hire someone specifically to lead the efforts of our committees. But the thing is that the person who was actually there for the Office of Juvenile Affairs, that person was actually more there not to lead the efforts, but to support the efforts, right? And so what happened was we were, in any work that we're doing, whether it's in the different committees we have or at the full board, really what it comes down to is we simply just ask, hey, we need this funding, or they share, there are these different conferences, and it's, hey, I'd like to go to this conference. And so they, just like anything else that happens at state office, it gets worked out. And with that, the youth committee, really getting down into that stakeholder stuff. One of the things that I think is really great that is actually, I think, kind of nice, as sort of a quote-unquote outsider. The thing is with the OJA board, to give you an idea of all this, up until this last year, they've never once in 20 years had a youth panel. And I think for most of us, it's kind of astounding because we've done that time and time and time again. And again, 20 years down the road, they've never done this. But here are some of the things that we've been working on. So we ended up having a probation officer as sort of our, develop as our chair for the youth committee because it was a partnership of professionals and youth. And I'm the vice chair. Again, we trusted that committee to be able to put in that work, as well as the two other committees that I'm part of, the Prevention and Policy Committee. As a result of that, we have actually been able to make, whether it was the youth or others, been able to make those different recommendations. And now those recommendations have actually been, I think in January, they were brought to the board they were brought to the full departmental board, and then went on to the office of the governor. And how many of us have ever had, a young person's recommendations become our official public record to the governor? With that, many of our recommendations, because we had that lived expertise, actually helped with the work that was being done, and our recommendations actually rose to the top because we realized that, well, while these might have great intent, that doesn't solve the issue because, we as crossover youth, we know how to work the system, and so sometimes it might not be beneficial for, something we might think will work. From there, again, with that trust and autonomy, we were actually able to develop a charter, application, policies, most of which was actually just taken, kind of like this technical assistance, just like the Center for States can provide, just on the juvenile side. We actually had a person from the National OJJDP Office of Juvenile Justice, who was a technical assistant, come in and provide us different things for recommendations for those different documents, and then essentially be able to make edits from there. And myself, I actually got to take responsibility of doing the policy and all these different things. And the great thing, we didn't actually even have to have approval from the department. Now, that said, we still sent it on because, we needed things to be checked. But with all the work that we were doing, it actually was not necessary. We did it because in the grand scheme, logistically, we need something to check. But I think that's great. And lastly, the thing that I really want to highlight here, and I forgot to tell you about this, Greg, actually, as I was writing stuff down, we're actually in the talks right now, and this will probably shock a lot of you. We're actually in the talks right now of actually having about $10,000 for strictly the youth committee to allocate to service providers. And again, how many of us have ever considered giving them any money, let alone, 4 zeros behind it? With that, we are also looking to create a fund. We're also looking to create a fund from the board directly for the youth committee because, again, we know that they need that extra support. But again, all these different things are coming from a group who has been around for 20 years, and their first youth panel was this year. And I think that just shows us that we can do a lot of great work if we take that step back and say what needs to happen, what can happen, and if we have an issue where a young person maybe not know everything, how can we help them to develop that? That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, David. I appreciate you sharing your experiences. We're going to move into another series of polling questions now for you all as the audience to hear about some of your experiences. We could bring the polls up. So at the top, what are some of the successes you've seen in your work with stakeholders, specifically engaging stakeholders? What's gone well? Additionally, the bottom question that you'll see there, and these are short answer questions where you can, you're not selecting from a pick list value. You just include what comes to you. The second question is, what are the biggest challenges you currently face in engaging particular stakeholder groups in strategic planning, monitoring, evaluation, ongoing CQI, and other improvement processes? Folks are starting to respond. It looks like that bringing community collaboration into major changes in a community, multiple stakeholders, buy-in, excuse me, this is the successes, I should say, utilizing existing processes, youth-provided feedback, focus groups across various stakeholders, involvement in the CFSR process. All right, looking at our some of the challenges that folks are listing there in our second question, retention, loss of continuity of information, just the amount of time that's available. Buy-in, communication, reaching everyone. Looks like folks' schedules, the logistics, and I think competing time constraints, stipends for youth and parents for their participation, follow through. So we're seeing a lot of responses here as far as the successes and the challenges that you all have experienced in your work at engaging youth, families, and stakeholders in these processes. So now we're going to go ahead and move forward and examine some potential barriers to engagement. All right. A number of barriers exist to meaningfully engaging youth, families, and stakeholders in strategic planning, including logistical challenges such as the lack of time, lack of transportation, or lack of access to child care, among others. That was something that we saw and heard from you all in the previous polling questions, just that some of those logistical challenges in bringing folks to the table. An agency culture that does not support meaningful engagement. Lack of regular, ongoing stakeholder engagement efforts by the agency. Resistance from agency staff to working with stakeholders as equal partners. Agency staff who lack skills to have potentially difficult conversations with stakeholders, including youth and families. Unclear purpose for the engagement and lack of clarity around roles and level of effort. Meetings that discuss a range of issues but do not focus on the goals at hand. Or a lack of culturally responsive skills among agency staff to facilitate effective youth, family, and stakeholder engagement. Again, these are common barriers that exist across child welfare systems in multiple jurisdictions, and we certainly saw that in some of the responses to our previous polling questions. A challenge faced by many agencies involves difficulty with engaging parents in a meaningful way. This can result from barriers and dynamics that exist between systems and the folks who are receiving services, and the fact that some families view their interactions with the child welfare agency or the system as being negative. This can affect their attitudes about voluntarily engaging with the agency in any way, even if such engagement would be beneficial. Additionally, agencies may hesitate to engage families in agency work due to current or pending legal issues. So it's clear that there are barriers that exist, but they are certainly not insurmountable, and there are a number of jurisdictions that have had great success in engaging their stakeholders, engaging youth and families, and overcoming these. And so at this time, we have one such jurisdiction who we are fortunate to have with us today. We have the state of Delaware and a few of our colleagues from Delaware. And so if I may, I would like to introduce Keith Zirkle. He is the Program Support and Resource Administrator with the Delaware Department of Services for Children, Youth, and Their Families, which is the Child Welfare Agency. We also have Rachel Neff, who is the State-led Court Improvement Program Manager for the Family Courts for the state of Delaware, as well as Karen D'Erasmo, who is the Executive Director of Prevent Child Abuse Delaware. So at this time, I will turn it over to Keith to talk to us about the great work going on in Delaware.
Thanks, Greg. Delaware is going to talk to you today about past, current, and future collaborative planning efforts. And we're going to share this presentation as a team. So I have an opening question for you. So in your state or jurisdiction, what would it look like if you believed, first, that given the right resources, families make sound decisions about their children's welfare, and second, kids should grow up with their families? So using those two core principles, Delaware is taking a different approach to strategic planning for child welfare. Beginning with Annie E. Casey Foundation engagement, Family Services launched a package of 17 initiatives in 2012 aimed at strengthening family engagement practices and using a collection of evidence-based tools. That established the foundation for improving outcomes for children and youth. Delaware realizes the Child Welfare Agency can't do this work alone, and that child welfare belongs to a broad range of service providers, both public and private. Strategic planning follows the same path. So you'll see the penny on your slide. So I want you to note the penny's motto: E pluribus unum. Out of the many, one. So Delaware has a long history of collaboration, especially for targeted initiatives, but has really lacked a broad, multidisciplinary, and comprehensive strategic plan that includes front-end prevention all the way through post-permanency exits from foster care. So our vision has really evolved over the past 5 years or so, and the system is shifting from thinking that child safety for at-risk children is best assured through two traditional pathways, either agency supervision or by foster care removals. And we've come to accept that there are alternative, less intrusive paths to take, and we have an expanding use of differential responses now to address a changing population. Last summer at the initial planning meeting in Washington, D.C., Delaware's 3 grantees, the community-based Child Abuse Prevention Program, the Court Improvement Program, and Child Welfare, agreed to meet and try to better coordinate the 3 federal plans that we have been submitting separately. While the 3 plans cover prevention through adoption services, we really lack the coordination of a single strategic plan. And prior Child and Family Services plans were structured primarily around federal funding streams and the outcomes and systems that states are held accountable through the Child and Family Services reviews. The 3 leads for the grants formed a Child and Family Services Plan Steering Committee, and at that table we have children's mental health, prevention, early intervention, juvenile justice, substance abuse provider, community service agencies, and of course child welfare agency representatives. So monthly meetings for the steering committee began in December, and one of the early activities was to form 3 work groups to help the first phase of our planning, which was to do like a self-assessment. And the 3 work groups are organized around gathering data. The second work group is around stakeholder surveys. And the third work group was around stakeholder focus groups. So we look forward to developing a living plan with annual updates and revisions as we move closer to the June 30th submission date. Organizing around the Child and Family Service Plan is a natural fit for Delaware to bring about changes. So Rachel, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thanks Keith. So again, my name is Rachel Neff and I work here at Family Court in Delaware, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're doing now on the ground level. And so some of the information that I'm going to share is very concrete, and I think hopefully what I can convey in the message is that because of our work over the last couple of years on really a monthly basis kind of coming together, that we've been able to see some practice changes. And again, I appreciate the partnerships here in our state, because we've had to come together to both look at problems and then work together to kind of resolve them or find different ways of addressing issues. So I know earlier in the call there's already been lots of talk about the importance of involving individuals who are directly impacted by our systems in the conversation. So here in Delaware, we've taken that seriously, and we have, through the Court Improvement Program and other partners, talked with foster parents, talked with youth, talked with parents, talked also with the practitioners who are involved in our courtrooms, and the work that's underway with our child welfare work, and that's been very informative. And again, I think the point has already been stressed earlier in the call about how critical that is. So the forum that we've really been able to address our work over the last couple of years is because Delaware went through round 3 of the CFSR. In 2016, we were tasked with creating our performance improvement plan, and then we had to carry out the PIP beginning in 2017, and we are wrapping things up this spring of 2019. So I think from the court side of things, in the PIP, there's so many different work groups that get formed, and then there's various activities and strategies that are going to be addressed. But we partnered with the state agency around the permanency work, because obviously that's a role that the court plays a significant role in. And so our permanency work group came together. We had to identify the areas that we were going to address. So I'll just very quickly looking at the cases that were actually out of guidelines from a permanency perspective that were pooled in our CFSR. looking at those cases, doing case reviews was something our committee addressed, and we're still doing ongoing. Looking at data, I mean, even just knowing, how are we doing as it relates to various data points, such as filing a TPR, really looking at, because permanency starts from the beginning of a case, what are the efforts underway around family search and engagement, and how does that impact a case throughout its life. So this work group, and again, when we got up and running, people kind of sat around the table, and we had to really nail down what are we going to be working on these next couple of years in light of the CFSR. And so I think just recognizing that we weren't always sure was okay, and now I can say that because of the ongoing relationship with my state agency lead, our work group was able to kind of get up and running and be functioning in a healthy way. So I really appreciate the lead at the state agency and working to co-chair it, and then also involving stakeholders in that work group. So, and clearly there's been accountability and oversight by the Children's Bureau as well. So there's that monthly reporting and checking in and providing updates in terms of how we're doing statewide. I just want to say the July meeting that Keith has already referenced, being able to sit at the table with representatives from family court and the state agency and other key partners in our state was helpful. We walked away from that meeting, and since July, there's been a couple of things we thought were important in Delaware to look at. For example, the youth who are coming in and leaving the system very quickly after 30 to 60 days. What does that look like for Delaware? What's kind of the story behind that? How are we doing with family engagement? What were some of the factors that contributed to those placements? That was one kind of takeaway, and we have a project ongoing that's looking at that. Another was we just convened a meeting for, a judicial officer actually convened it and brought together our partners from the state agency to look at how we're avoiding placing children into care through sua sponte custody. So is there anything we can do to avoid, these short placements that may be coming from other systems? And finally, looking at going, back to what I said about engaging stakeholders, we learned a lot from information that was shared by stakeholders, and focusing on the support that parents are getting very early on in the process was something the CIP was dedicated to addressing. And we found through a pilot project some interesting findings about when we provided parents with more support and resources earlier on in the life of their case, that did impact things such as showing up for their hearings, receiving more visitation with their children, completing more case plan elements. And now we're kind of thinking, because we did that pilot, what's the takeaway and what's the next steps with it? And I think in light of the Family First Prevention Act, there's a lot of opportunities to be doing more with that. So I appreciate our state agency director for thinking through some ideas with us as well. And I really think, again, Delaware is going to be sustaining the work that we've already been doing, and Keith's mentioned we have our steering committee. And I'm going to turn it over to Karen, who's going to talk about kind of what's next for us.
Thanks, Rachel. I just wanted to add my role in Delaware as the executive director of Prevent Child Abuse Delaware is also to be the lead agency for the community-based child abuse prevention grants. And so when Keith brought us together, he brought the people who represent the courts, the folks who are at our child welfare agency and our CB-CAP lead agency, so that we could talk about how to better utilize the federal funds that we receive within our state. So as Keith had mentioned, Delaware has begun the process of developing a shared vision for strengthening families and prevention using the Child and Family Service Plan as a blueprint for reorienting the child welfare system towards prevention, integrated planning, and system improvement efforts. And as we saw in the polling data that we generated during this call, there are probably about 80% of you out there who are also engaged in looking at how to use the CFSP as a means to really work more closely with partners within the child welfare system. In Delaware, we do have the chance to build on our long history of collaboration and strong public-private partnerships that have assured that we all have been invited to have a seat at the table. And that is something that has been going on for many years. Agreement, particularly within the last 5 years, on our values, principles, and goals has also been incredibly important. And the fact that we have a strong continuum of programs designed to strengthen families that includes home visiting and school-based early intervention, and the fact that we already have some alternative responses to entry into the child welfare system that have been developed. Our challenge now as we continue to move into the future, and I think if you can see on your screen, Keith had talked before about the penny and out of the many one. We're in the process now of trying to become more engaged with Bitcoin and moving our work forward together. We really challenged ourselves and in preparing for this conversation, challenged ourselves to think about some of our guiding principles. And Keith had shared that he felt it was really important to be able to make mistakes and to learn from them. And then Rachel, I think you just heard her talking about the fact that we want to have a problem-solving mindset and that we need to be able to say to each other, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question right now, but together we can figure out what the answer is. And for me, I really believe that we need not to be afraid of what we might be losing in order to gain something better. And I know that sometimes risk can be a four-letter word in the work that we do because of the huge responsibilities that we have around keeping children safe and healthy. But risk is not a four-letter word. We need to be able to accept that to gain something better, we need to do something different. So we have two opportunities right now in Delaware to embrace change, to use the CFSP to promote our larger vision and to align existing structures as a way of formalizing and driving our vision forward. During this current round of the CSFP work that we are doing, we're working together on data collection, focus groups, and we've been adding questions in the focus group work that we've been doing, particularly about prevention. And we've been widening our group of stakeholders to include people working on the front lines. We have a family crisis therapist program that places child welfare staff in our elementary schools. And we also have a behavioral health consultant program that places people in our middle schools. And so we want those people to be talking to us about what we can be doing at the front end of this process to help families and children who have been identified as having needs before they end up having to become a part of the more formal child welfare system. We're also interested in bringing people to the table who are doing promoting safe and stable families work. The second thing that we have as an opportunity is that we can utilize the Family First legislation to rethink how decisions are being made within our state and what resources can be made available so that we honor our core principles around the family's role in decision making and keeping kids with their families. And so we've been talking about increasing the number of differential responses that we have available that keep kids out of care. And two areas that have come up during the conversations that we've been having are families that are experiencing domestic violence and families where there is an issue of chronic neglect. So we think about the fact that structure drives behavior. We all like structure. We are far more likely to engage in the normal ways of doing business than we are to behave in ways that are an exception to the rules. Working to formalize our connections and the processes that support our shared vision and that promote working together makes it easier for everyone to get behind that effort. It is our hope that formally recognizing both our goals and the process for getting there will create a path that our partners will be eager to explore with us. And during our last conversation about this, Keith said, and I think this is true, just do it. Invite others in. Take the risk, and you're bound to be able to gain something better. So Greg, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Karen. And I love the reference to the Bitcoin and from the transition from the old with the penny to the new with the Bitcoin, and certainly the great work that you all have shared. As the country is gearing up for the upcoming Child and Family Services Plan, the Center for States has developed a new series related to strategic planning and child welfare that includes a webpage and a couple of briefs, as well as links on the webpage to additional resources. And the second brief in that series, the first has to do with a framework for accomplishing the integration of strategic planning with improvement processes. And then the second brief in the series has to do with this whole idea of meaningfully engaging youth, families, and stakeholders. And as a part of that, we have identified a set of tasks of stakeholder engagement and collaboration that you see here. And I do want to be clear that these tasks are focused on the system level versus the individual or case level, but here they are on your screen, and we're going to dig into each of these briefly in the following slides. I do want to make one point, though, that though they are listed sequentially here, agencies can start wherever they are in the process of collaborating with youth, families, and stakeholders, and they may revisit any or all of these whenever needed throughout their engagement efforts. So we have identifying and reaching out to stakeholders, leveling the playing field, setting the parameters for purposeful and actionable engagement, making sure everyone stays informed, and providing feedback mechanisms. As we've discussed, engaging youth, families, and stakeholders in strategic planning and improvement processes is critical to their success. Also, as previously mentioned, this stakeholder engagement works as a coordinated two-stage process. Agencies work to engage stakeholders throughout the year to gain their input into ongoing processes and collect data that will help to inform ongoing projects. And then that regular engagement creates a pool of available participants for the point-in-time processes like the CFSP and the CFSR. While it's also important to note that even during those point-in-time processes, ongoing engagement is still going on, still continues by the agency. For the point-in-time processes like the CFSP and CFSR, child welfare agencies are encouraged to appoint a planning and implementation team that includes diverse staff members to lead these processes on behalf of the agency and in partnership with key stakeholders. That team, an implementation team like that, would be responsible for engaging stakeholders in the processes and incorporating their voices into the plan's goals, strategies, recommended interventions, and evaluation work. So once agencies have identified the stakeholders and the network groups that they need to engage in these processes, then the staff in charge of those processes would be responsible for reaching out to the stakeholders. So one particularly successful way to do that is to not reinvent the wheel and to identify when those groups already come together and ask if you can attend an already established meeting to really make that connection and get that going. Doing so serves two purposes simultaneously, gathering input on agency services and initiatives and building relationships that will facilitate the inclusion of group members in the strategic planning and improvement processes.
Thanks, Greg. I would say also just thinking about to level the playing field as we think about that, thinking about when is there times when we should be going to youth groups and asking for them to advise versus offering them up. Can you advise on this piece, but really thinking about we can't move forward until we've talked to them because they're going to know best how they're impacted by this, and really shifting the culture and where in the process are you inserting folks in their feedback, because that changes how you operate in general, that you can't move forward without thinking about that. To work effectively with diverse stakeholders, agency needs to level the playing field, that is, develop partnerships based on equal participation and shared responsibilities. So agencies should not just ask stakeholders to provide feedback or comment on data and documents, but offer them real responsibilities and leadership roles as appropriate. Such as things like David and I are on different commissions or committees in our states that truly are in leadership positions, not just to hold a spot on it, but to really join in on the work. As such, the work of the team can be shared equally among its members, both agency staff and external stakeholders. Leveling the playing field also requires addressing barriers to participation that may exist among various stakeholder groups, particularly children, youth, and families, when it comes to how to get to a specific geographical location or the cost to do that. To successfully engage families and youth, agency staff need to work with them from the outset of their involvement with child welfare system. Involving families and youth early on in their own case planning and decision making can help build trust and relationships that can form the foundation of further positive engagement with the agency. As relationships, trust, and skills are developed, families and youth can work with the agency in an increased capacity by serving on decision or policy-making bodies or strategic planning and other teams. Pass it back to you, Greg.
Thanks, Elliot. The next task involves setting the parameters for purposeful and actionable engagement. And with that, what you'll see there at those, the outer boxes are, those are types of foundational documents that are useful to set or to establish at the outset in an early step to really guide the work. So you'll see there that there are generally like 3 foundational documents that can support this engagement: a team mission statement, a team charter, and an open communication plan. Everyone wants to know why they're at the table, what the purpose is. So as a first step, the team's purpose should be clarified through the creation of a team mission statement. It's also important for team leaders to clarify roles and expectations with stakeholders and other team members early in the process. That really helps to, or it would be important to establish the scope, the time frames, the decision-making authority, and communication strategies. Also, developing a comprehensive open communication plan is critical for youth, families, and stakeholders to effectively work together. To remain fully engaged, all stakeholders need to have regular opportunities to share their ideas, thoughts, and opinions and weigh in on vital decisions. Additionally, what you see there in the circle involves holding and supporting, facilitating effective meetings. So those foundational docs that you see there that we've just covered, they really help to set the stage for effective meetings and purposeful and actionable engagement. To facilitate stakeholder meetings that foster meaningful collaboration and mutual learning, it's important to train and support staff in becoming effective meeting facilitators. And effective facilitators manage meetings in a way where participants feel valued and heard, where results are accomplished, and where folks' precious time and resources are not wasted. So if we could, Chris, if you would quickly flip over to the team charter that David has provided, just as an example of a foundational document. And David, if you want to share a brief word about this before we move forward, I think that'd be great.
Yeah, and for the sake of time, I'll keep it short. So all these things are highlighted because what we did is, like I said, we had someone who provided technical assistance, which again the center can do, and we basically just took. There were 2 different examples that the person who was providing TA for us thought were maybe the best to go with as a start. just that way we're not reinventing the wheel, and all these different highlighted parts are edits that actually I personally made. And then used as a proposal. And really how it worked was we just had the committee and everyone made their different ideas or suggestions as it was there, and then I took it back and just made different edits based on what they had stated, and then also just my own experience and whatnot and seeing different successes. And then from there submitted it to our committee, and like I said, we weren't even required to get this approved, but it has been submitted to our department just because it's good to do so. And yeah, and so we'll be, and so we'll end up having that in public record in the near future. So it'll be great. You guys actually get to be the first eyes on it, if you will.
Thanks so much, David.
Thanks, David. So looking at the next slide, we're going to be thinking about making sure everyone stays informed. For stakeholders to participate in agency planning processes effectively, they need to have regular access to information about the processes as well as information and data to help inform their conclusions, suggestions, and team decision-making. This could look like things like a monthly email or newsletter, monthly meetings that are open to the public, to share information or for people to ask questions. In the state of Oregon, the Governor's Child Foster Care Commission that I vice chair right now, we realize there isn't a space right now for foster parents and youth to come forward and share their day-to-day experiences of their experience with the child welfare system. So we wanted to create a space for that to happen where they could share not just directly to DHS but on public record, and where DHS or others who show up could answer those questions as a way to have honest dialogue that isn't completely over-prepared and filtered. Regular communication with stakeholders working on strategic planning, assessment, and evaluation should address the following items throughout the CFSP process as appropriate: ongoing review of data and assessment of agency strengths and concerns, selection of priority areas for the CFSP and CFSR PIP, identification of goals, objectives, target populations, and interventions, provision of implementation support, implementation of interventions, and assessment of processes and outcome data. Back to you, Greg.
Thanks so much. So the next task involved is providing evaluation and feedback mechanisms. To improve stakeholder participation in a strategic planning process, agencies need to reach out to stakeholders throughout the year to give feedback regarding how the input they provided was used. Stakeholders should be regularly informed of the progress and outcomes of any process in which they have participated, as well as next steps. This encourages stakeholders to continue to connect with the engagement process, builds trust, and strengthens relationships that were established during the process. Stakeholders also will have the opportunity to provide feedback regarding their participation and suggest areas for improvement. The two-way communication plan and feedback loop that is created at the outset of any process should include strategies for continuing to communicate with external stakeholders once the formal part of the process ends. This may help keep the momentum going and will encourage stakeholders to participate in future agency initiatives. Agency staff should make a sustained effort to actively listen to stakeholders, especially children, youth, and families, and incorporate their perspectives into system improvements. One mechanism for this might be participation in ongoing CQI processes. Agencies should also establish a process to organize and track stakeholder feedback so it can be properly considered, shared, and updated as the need arises. Improvement initiatives in which stakeholders have participated should be regularly highlighted to stakeholders in communications with them. If stakeholders see positive change because of their involvement in strategic planning or change initiatives, they're more likely to be involved in the future. Now, for the sake of time, and so that you all have the benefit to hear from the entire story from New Jersey, it's my pleasure to introduce two of our colleagues from New Jersey, Nancy Gaglianone, Acting Director of the Office of Strategic Development with the New Jersey Department of Children and Families, as well as Aubrey Powers, Executive Director of the Office of Family Voice. And so I will turn it over to you all now.
Hi, thank you so much. Good afternoon. My name is Nancy Gaglianone, and I am the Acting Director of the Office of Strategic Development. in New Jersey for the Department of Children and Families, and I am here with my colleague Aubrey Powers, the Executive Director of DCF's Office of Family Voice. We're going to share two strategies, some strategies that we use with engaging our provider community in the development of our evidence-based practice blueprint, as well as how we've engaged courts, resource parents, and birth parents in our PIP, our Program Improvement Plan development. So I'm going to start off with the blueprint work, which we did, and how we got our providers to the table in a meaningful way. So just to give you a little background, to build on our steady progress in reducing the use of foster care and helping greater number of children remain safely with family and kin, the Department of Children and Families prioritized the continuing transitioning of the service array to research and evidence-supported services whenever we could. So if there were models out there available, we were saying, how can we, transition some of our service array to these evidence-based practices? So this was a priority in our strategic plan in 2014. So it really was elevated in terms of the work that the department was going to do. Service array also was identified for improvement in our CFSR, so that was a motivating factor as well. So in order to get the work done, we needed internal staffing capacity to focus on the task. And so the leadership developed the Office of Strategic Development to really focus on this work. At about the same time, the Annie E. Casey Foundation's Evidence-Based Practice Group reached out to DCF and asked the question, what do states need to move into more evidence-based work? So the Office of Strategic Development was working on understanding this better and diving into literature to really frame out our process, and we kept reading about implementation science and how it was key to lifting up evidence-based practices. So with the support from Annie E. Casey Foundation, the state partnered with the National Implementation Research Network, who are experts in the science of implementation. And I believe in our first consultation with NERN, they asked who we were going to bring to the table to help DCF figure this out. And so since DCF purchases services from over 1,100 providers statewide, and we were building a blueprint to help the department transition our service array to evidence-based practices where it made sense, we needed to have the providers at the table right away. And so what I'm going to tell you is just how we got those providers at the table. I'm going to just give you a very practical thing that we did. So, and it was very quick. We wrote and quickly released a call for participation, and I'm happy to share this with all, to develop the evidence-based practice blueprint through a series of provider workshops. So it was a very clear and concise and like 4-page document that we sent out, what we were doing, why we were doing it, who was eligible to participate, and how we would select the organizations to participate. So right from the get-go, we were super clear about what we were trying to do. And just so some of the criteria that we asked for was the applicants, the organizations had to have experience implementing an evidence-based practice. They had to commit to attending all 4 workshops. They had to commit to bringing a team of at least 3 staff from their agencies to all the workshops. So we asked for a person in a leadership level, a management level, and then a practitioner level. And then we told them that we were going to select, we're going to make the selection of who was going to help us out based on the, a balanced portfolio of a size, size of an organization, length of time the organization has been implementing the model, geographic diversity, things like that. And so I guess I wanted to really share this example because from that example, we had 100% of participation. When we select the organizations and the individuals, we had 4 workshops. We provided no money, and they came to the table, and they really helped us build a blueprint of how to integrate evidence-based practices into New Jersey's portfolio. So we're happy to share the whole, blueprint, as well as, kind of some of the, strategies that we use within those workshops. But I just really wanted to provide that as an example. People will come if you are clear with what you're asking them for. So I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Aubrey Powers.
Thank you, Nancy. And I want to discuss strategic planning and stakeholder engagement as it pertains to development of our program improvement plan. So New Jersey underwent the CFSR round 3 of the Child and Family Service Review in July of 2017. So of course, as a part of that process, we conducted numerous focus groups, in fact, with about 120 stakeholders, including young adults, birth parents, resource parents, service providers, and court personnel, including deputy attorney generals, public defenders, law guardians, and about 10 judges from around the state. Now, the CFSR results in general showed strong practice for DCF in terms of ensuring safety of children at the front end. However, it also showed that there were practice improvements needed in engaging parents and ensuring they had comprehensive ongoing assessments. And of course, when we talk about parent engagement, we must also speak to our engagement of fathers. And so like most states, that's an area where we show greater challenges in terms of performance improvement. And so with this in mind, we went to the work of drafting our PIP. We went back and conducted focus groups with many of those same stakeholders, and also met with our line staff, our supervisors, our workers, to get input from various aspects. And so this gave us the opportunity to look at our results through the lens of our administrative data and root cause analysis. And the conversation really became, these are our findings. This is what we think our findings mean and what led to them. And here are some goals and strategies we think will be effective in terms of helping us to improve. And we were able to have those conversations with our stakeholder and ask the question, does that sound right? Did we miss anything? Would you like to add anything, or is there something important that needs to be added? Now, I should say that all of this was done within the context of a gubernatorial election, and we received a new governor in November of 2017, and then in January of 2018, our new commissioner was appointed, Christine Norbert-Beyer. And so immediately our commissioner propelled New Jersey toward becoming a 21st century child welfare system. And so right out of the gate, she made it very clear that the priority would be to make sure that DCF was responsive to the voices of families with which we interact. And so she began a series of community listening tours, which I will speak more about in just a moment. So I want to get back to the PIP. And with the PIP, we partnered with the Children's Bureau to have an on-site 2-day meeting. And again, we met with our entire executive team. We met with all of our court partners. And the second day of that discussion was really devoted to improving our engagement and assessment of families. And as I stated in particular, non-resident fathers. And from those discussions, we really continue to see ensuring the value that family voice was incorporated as much as possible into our planning. And of course, that dovetailed very nicely into the listening tours our commissioner was conducting. So the tours were held around the state, and they allowed our commissioner to hear firsthand, straightforward opinions about what works and what needs to be improved throughout the department. Critics and allies alike were invited to share their stories and inform our progress. She held altogether about 20 listening tours, and what the commissioner heard quite clearly was that our constituents wanted not only to be heard and acknowledged, but to have real input as the department plans, develops, and improves its work. So, of course, this led to creation of a new office, my office, which is the Office of Family Voice. And that office is vested with the responsibility of elevating the voices of our constituents throughout the department and ensuring that our policies, operations, and practices are infused with the voices of those who have lived experience. We are in our infancy, being only a couple of months old. However, what is exciting is the opportunity to bring on and hire individuals who have lived experience, from young adults to parents. They're going to help us facilitate community meetings with community stakeholders and help the department understand the strengths and challenges of our services, policies, and practices. So really, we are engaging the community not as interviewees or just stakeholders, but as expert consultants and partners. And our community is certainly a welcome partner in our efforts to ensure that everyone in New Jersey is safe, healthy, and connected. So that's the story in New Jersey. Stay tuned, and we'll turn it back to you, Greg.
Excellent. Thanks so much. And I love that. Experts and partners. I think that's fabulous. Just here in closing, recognizing the time, I know everyone is well aware of this. The CFSP is due June 30th. It provides an opportunity for all of us to establish a shared vision and engage our youth, families, and stakeholders in program improvement. The program instructions for the 2020 through 24 CFSP will be coming soon from the Children's Bureau. So with that, I want to also let you all know that the series that I mentioned previously, the Strategic Planning and Child Welfare series, is available on the Center for States website. It includes a number of useful resources for states and territories as you all are working on your CFSP. We also have the Change and Implementation and Practice series, and just a wealth of other resources and supports, including customized technical assistance. And so please let us know how the center can support you in your efforts. Lastly, please if you have time, please complete the survey here at the end. And with that, we thank you all for your time and participation today, and let us know if you have any questions. Thanks so much.
We are at the end of our scheduled time, so we will be finishing this webinar shortly. Feel free to contact us using our website, capacity.childwelfare.gov/states. That's capacity.childwelfare.gov/STATES. You can also contact us by our email address, capacityinfo@icf.com. That's capacity@icf.com, or by our phone number, 844-222-0272. Thank you for joining us, and have a great day.